Julius Malema, a name synonymous with controversy, a figure who commands attention, has always thrived, seemingly energized in the heat of political controversy. It's where he makes his mark, where his voice is amplified. As leader of South Africa's economic freedom fighters, the EFF, he's built his brand, a recognizable force on fiery speeches, filled with passion and conviction, and bold challenges directly confronting to the status quo. He doesn't shy away from ruffling feathers. From his ANC Youth League days, a training ground for his future ambitions, to commanding the EFF, his own political entity, Malema has made and continues to make powerful enemies, those who oppose his vision and inspired, motivating a loyal, youthful following. They see in him a champion of their cause. He's called for, repeatedly and forcefully, land expropriation without compensation, a policy proposal igniting fierce debates, sparking intense arguments about justice, what it truly means, and economic freedom. The core tenets of his political ideology. Supporters hail him. They celebrate him as a truth-teller, someone who speaks what others are afraid to say. Critics warn, however, he's a dangerous populist, using rhetoric that could incite unrest, threatening South Africa's fragile unity, a nation still healing from its past. Controversy isn't a side note. It's not an accident. It's the core, the very essence of his political identity. It defines him. Every statement he makes, every utterance is measured against, scrutinized in light of his history of disruption. It's the lens through which he is viewed. Until recently, in the past few years, his focus was reshaping, fundamentally altering South Africa's landscape, its political and economic terrain. Now, Malema is signaling, indicating a dramatic pivot, a significant shift from national firebrand, a domestic agitator, to a player, a participant on the global stage, expanding his influence beyond national borders. Even by his standards, considering his track record, his latest moves, his most recent actions are extraordinary, remarkable and unprecedented, forcing conversations, compelling discussions the world can't ignore. They demand attention and analysis. His new ambitions suggest, they hint at, his vision for economic freedom, his aspirations for financial liberation now stretches far beyond, extending outwards, South Africa's borders. He's setting his sights on a global stage. The world was stunned, a collective gasp echoing across continents. News outlets scrambled to report the unfolding events, their headlines screaming of a seismic shift in global politics. When Malema, flanked by EFF officials, stood defiantly at the podium, his words carrying the weight of a revolution. The atmosphere was charged, anticipation hanging heavy in the air. Announced the Pan-African Front, a coalition forged in the fires of economic injustice and fueled by the desire for true African sovereignty. This front was established for economic sovereignty, a bold declaration that challenged the existing power structures and promised a new era of self-determination for the continent. He called for African nations to unite, to cast off the shackles of the past and embrace a future where their resources benefit their own people. He urged them to nationalize strategic resources, reclaiming control over their wealth and ensuring that it serves the needs of their citizens, not foreign interests. This was a call to break free from neo-colonial dependencies, the subtle yet pervasive forms of control that continue to bind Africa to its former colonizers. It was time to dismantle the exploitative economic structures that have perpetuated poverty and inequality for far too long. The boldest move, a proposition that sent shockwaves through the global financial system. Proposing an African resource standard, a revolutionary concept that aimed to redefine the value of African commodities. This standard was intended to replace the US dollar, the dominant currency in international trade, with a system based on the continent's vast natural resources. This would fundamentally alter the dynamics of commodity trading, giving Africa greater control over its economic destiny. Malema directly accused Western corporations of perpetuating a system of injustice. He condemned their exploitation of African resources, their disregard for the environment, and their contribution to the continent's economic woes. With unwavering conviction, he declared the era of economic plunder over, signaling a new chapter in Africa's struggle for self-determination and economic liberation. He outlined a vision, a roadmap for a future where Africa is no longer a victim of global economic forces, but a master of its own destiny. A future where Africa sets its own terms, resource prices, ensuring fair compensation for its natural wealth and breaking free from the cycle of exploitation. This would allow Africa to control and directly fund development, investing in its infrastructure, education, and healthcare, and creating a brighter future for its people. This would be achieved through a new bank designed to serve the interests of Africa. This bank would be independent of the IMF, freeing Africa from the conditionalities and policies that have often hindered its development. It would also operate independently of the World Bank, allowing Africa to chart its own course without external interference. The room fell silent, the weight of Malema's words hanging heavy in the air. As the implications sank in, the potential ramifications of this declaration rippling outwards. This was more than just political rhetoric. It was a carefully calculated strategy, a bold challenge to the status quo. It was a direct challenge, a gauntlet thrown down before the established powers. To the global financial order, a system that has long favored the West at the expense of the developing world, Malema was no longer simply a voice of dissent, just a South African opposition leader. He had transcended national boundaries, emerging as a figure of continental significance. He was strategically positioning himself on the world stage as a continental revolutionary, a champion of Pan-Africanism, and a voice for the voiceless. The Johannesburg Proclamation was more than just a statement. It was a gauntlet thrown, a declaration of war against economic injustice and neocolonialism. It was a challenge directed at both African governments, urging them to embrace a new path of self-reliance and unity, and Western power centers, forcing them to confront the consequences of their exploitative policies. Suddenly, the world was forced to take notice, had to pay attention to the rising tide of discontent and the growing demand for a more just and equitable global order. And the reactions would be swift, a flurry of diplomatic maneuvers, economic sanctions, and political condemnations. Swift and severe, as the established powers sought to protect their interests and maintain their dominance. Malema had irrevocably changed the conversation, shifting the focus from aid and dependency to self-determination and economic sovereignty. And the stakes were now undeniably global, with the potential to reshape the world's economic and political landscape. News of Malema's declaration quickly reached Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. Initially dismissive, Trump soon erupted on social media, branding Malema a communist radical and a threat to American interests. He warned that America would not tolerate threats to its companies or jobs. Trump's reaction elevated Malema from regional agitator to global antagonist in the eyes of the American right. The spat dominated headlines, giving Malema a global platform and a powerful adversary. It also underscored America's enduring economic interests in Africa's mineral wealth. The clash between Trump and Malema set the stage for a new, unpredictable chapter in international relations. To grasp Malema's strategy, look to Ouagadougou, where Captain Ibrahim Traore leads Burkina Faso. Traore, who seized power in a 2022 coup, is a young, charismatic military leader and outspoken Pan-Africanist. He expelled French troops, pivoted toward Russia, and champions local production and sovereignty. Like Malema, he's built a strong connection with disillusioned youth, positioning himself as a liberator from Western influence. Traore's isolation from regional bodies has only fueled his resolve to find like-minded allies. He's become a symbol of a new, assertive generation of African leaders willing to defy the old order. The real shock of Malema's proclamation was his alliance with Traore. Burkina Faso became the first nation to join his Pan-African front. On the surface, it's an unlikely partnership, a South African opposition leader and a Burkinabe military ruler. But both are united by anti-imperialist rhetoric and the red beret of revolution. Traore's expulsion of French forces aligns with Malema's vision of reclaiming African sovereignty. For Malema, this partnership gives his movement credibility and transforms it into a state-backed entity. For Traore, it offers legitimacy and a platform beyond the Sahel. The Pretoria-Ouagadougou axis signals a radical realignment in African politics, built on shared visions, not shared histories. It challenges the authority of regional bodies and hints at a new, unpredictable bloc emerging on the continent. The alliance is a bold statement. Africa's political landscape is shifting. The Malema-Traore alliance sent shockwaves through the African Union, already divided over West Africa's coup. The AU, committed to constitutional order, saw Malema's embrace of Traore as a direct challenge to its principles. Leaders in Nigeria, Kenya, and Ghana voiced alarm, fearing the spread of anti-Western populism. But Africa's youth responded differently. On social media, #African sovereignty trended as young people hailed the alliance as a challenge to the old order. The split reveals a generational and ideological divide. Established leaders versus a rising movement for economic liberation. The AU faces a dilemma: condemn the alliance and risk alienating the youth, or stay silent and legitimize military rule. The Malema-Traore axis has created a parallel power structure based on popular appeal, not formal recognition. The AU's struggle to respond exposes its own internal weaknesses. Africa's political sands are shifting, and the old guard is on notice. In Washington, Malema's moves have triggered deep concern. Africa's minerals are vital for the green energy transition, and a resource cartel led by anti-Western leaders is a nightmare scenario. The State Department warned of economic consequences for countries joining the new front, hinting at sanctions and loss of aid. But US officials know that heavy-handed tactics could backfire, fueling Malema's anti-imperialist narrative and pushing more nations into his camp. With China and Russia expanding their influence, the US faces a delicate balancing act. Diplomats are quietly urging key African allies to contain the radical bloc's influence. The real challenge: Malema's message resonates emotionally, not just economically. Washington is fighting an ideological battle for Africa's future. And it's not clear the old playbook will work. The stakes for US foreign policy in Africa have never been higher. Political analysts are closely observing the burgeoning alliance between Julius Malema and Ibrahim Traore. Many view this partnership as more than just a fleeting political moment. They see it as a potential paradigm shift, fundamentally altering the landscape of African geopolitics. This alliance is forcing a re-evaluation of existing power dynamics and alliances across the continent. Dr. Adana Okoro, a leading voice in African political analysis, notes that while the alliance on the surface seems promising, it taps into deep-seated frustrations with the status quo and lingering colonial legacies. The practicalities of implementing an African resource standard, a key tenet of their proposed agenda, faces huge practical hurdles, especially given the entrenched global economic order. The global financial system, as it stands, is fundamentally built on the dominance of the US dollar. Therefore, any attempt to bypass it and create an alternative system will inevitably provoke fierce resistance from established powers. It's a high-risk gamble, a calculated move with potentially massive repercussions that could either spark a genuine revolution, empowering marginalized communities, or lead to economic isolation, further marginalizing already vulnerable populations. Jean-Pierre Fofana, a respected Sahel security analyst, warns that the alliance could inadvertently legitimize military coups, providing a veneer of popular support and political validation for actions that undermine democratic processes. Military coups under the seemingly righteous banner of anti-imperialism, masking potentially authoritarian tendencies. Furthermore, Traore's increasingly visible pivot to Russia, seeking economic and military support, coupled with Malema's open admiration for Moscow's geopolitical strategies, could inadvertently open the door to greater Russian influence and strategic penetration across the African continent, potentially reshaping existing alliances and creating new dependencies. The emergence of what some are calling the Red Beret International is emerging, a bloc increasingly skeptical of traditional Western partnerships and perceived neo-colonial influences, and increasingly open to exploring new security alliances with non-Western actors. This shift could trigger a domino effect, setting off a chain reaction of political realignments, potentially encouraging other military takeovers in regions grappling with instability and weak governance, and further eroding already fragile democratic norms across the continent. The long-term consequences of these shifts, if left unchecked for regional stability, already a major concern in many parts of Africa, and the protection of fundamental human rights are deeply concerning and could be profoundly detrimental to the progress achieved in recent decades. The world is watching with bated breath as Africa's political map undergoes a dramatic transformation and its geopolitical boundaries are redrawn in real time. The stakes are not just economic, although the economic implications are significant. They're fundamentally about the future trajectory of democracy, its resilience and its potential to flourish, and the very essence of sovereignty, national independence, and self-determination on the continent, shaping its role in the global order. The next strategic moves, the decisions made in the coming months, will irrevocably shape Africa's destiny, determining its path forward and setting the stage for its long-term future for years, if not decades to come. As the dust settles, the world faces a pivotal question. What comes next? The Malema-Traore alliance has exposed deep fractures within Africa and the global south, fueling impatience with a world order seen as unjust. This is more than a headline. It's a potential turning point in global politics, where resource battles are also battles of ideology. The Pan-African front's future is uncertain. It could collapse or gain momentum, attracting more nations seeking change. South Africa's government now faces a dilemma: censure Malema or adapt to his populist message. The outcome will have continent-wide implications. Africa's resources are central to the global economy. Any disruption will be felt worldwide. The events in Johannesburg and Ouagadougou are a direct challenge to the status quo. The old certainties are fading, and new forces are rising. Africa is demanding to write its own story, and the world can no longer look away.